Hi everyone, welcome to our live stream series called Meet a Scientist. I'm Anjelica and I'm here in the BIOlab at the Albertson Research Center, which is this big building right over here. We're part of the St. Boniface Hospital in Winnipeg, Manitoba. We would like to acknowledge that we are located on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. In this week's live stream, we're meeting Dr. Zaved Waise. Right now, he's a postdoctoral fellow in the Division of Neurodegenerative Disorders, which we like to call D&D, at the Albertson Research Center, and his lab is just a few floors above us. We have Steve watching the chat over here, so if you have any questions for Zaved along the way, please let us know. Hi, Zaved. Thanks for joining us today and sharing a little bit about what you're doing. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Yeah.
So these past few weeks, we've had principal investigators, professors, departmental heads, directors, but you're our first postdoctoral fellow, or postdoc for short. Could you tell our viewers what exactly a postdoc is?
Okay. Yeah, sure. Why not? The postdoctoral fellow is a trainee position where the person get more training after finish their graduation. I mean, after getting their PhD, they are getting more training to get an independent position. That means this postdoctoral training make a person more perfect to get an independent teacher, scientist, or researcher position.
Okay, so then postdoctoral fellows are people who are working towards being the professors and directors and principal investigators of the science community.
Yes, exactly.
Perfect. So for those of you that don't know, to get to this stage, Zaved did 5 years for a bachelor's degree, 1 year for a master's degree, and 5 more years for a PhD. So it took him 11 more years on top of graduating high school to get his PhD and become Dr. Zaved Waise. Is that correct?
Yes, that is
Perfect.
correct. Yes.
And as a postdoc, what does your typical day look like? Are you more in the lab doing bench work, or are you reading and writing about your research, or are you mentoring other master's and PhD students that work in your lab?
Yeah, basically all. I mean, basically, I used to read a lot of bunch of recent literature that, hello? Oh, yeah, lot of recent literature that used to say me, so what is going on for recent science, as well as I read those papers, read those articles, and then design my experiments, and then discuss with my supervisor to design the experiment and then execute that experiments, as well as I also discuss with other colleagues, and also I help the other juniors like graduate students or other master's students to design their experiments and to execute their experiments.
Ah, so you're doing it all.
Yes, this is training, yeah.
Yeah. And I saw that you got your PhD in third internal medicine in Japan. What brought you all the way to Japan?
Well, yeah, so when I was a student, I mean undergrad student, that time I used to work with one of my professor who got his PhD from Japan, from a lab, that lab discovered ghrelin, the hunger hormone ghrelin. So when I was under his supervision, I used to hear a lot of stories about the ghrelin and also about the Japan and the Japanese culture and the Japanese research facilities. And that time I got fascinated to go there to do research. That's why I went there to work.
Awesome. And that's one really great thing about research. It can take you all around the world, and it brought you all the way from Japan to Canada.
Yeah, that's true.
So your lab looks at diabetic neuropathy, the dying of the sensory neurons in the tips of your fingers and your eyes and your toes. And before you started working at the research center, you studied obesity and diabetes. Could you
Yes.
tell our viewers why these are such important topics to study?
Well, so if you look at the diabetes or obese people, there are a lot of obese and diabetic people nowadays, and these diseases are growing like very fast. So, but however, there is no treatment or actually no drug that can treat diabetes or obesity. That's why it is important to discuss or to discover more pathway or more drug target that can be used to discover new drug to treat these patients. That's why these fields are very important to research.
Perfect. So you're trying to figure out how to potentially cure diabetes and the problems that come with obesity.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you for sending along some of your papers. I read this one.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
One day, high-fat diet induces inflammation in the nodose ganglion and hypothalamus of mice. So
Yeah.
that title is pretty self-explanatory. You fed mice high-fat diet for one day, caused inflammation in their hypothalamus, a small part in the middle of their brain. But what exactly is a nodose ganglion?
Oh, well, nodose ganglion is a part of the nervous system. And nodose ganglion can transmit different information from the peripheral organs, such as the gut, the liver, the heart, lung, to the brain. Actually, nodose ganglion can transfer signal between brain and the other peripheral organs.
Okay. So then, sorry, it's sending information from the peripheral organs to your brain or vice versa? Or
Vice
to,
versa. It's vice versa. It's just transmitting signals from the peripheral organs to the brain, and then brain sends signal back to those organs to work properly.
okay. And then also, what kind of role does the hypothalamus have in our body? And what would be the problem with having a hypothalamus that is inflamed from eating these high-fat diets?
Yeah, hypothalamus is a part of our brain, and that remain within the center of our brain, and that has multiple different functions. Mainly, it regulates different homeostatic function of our body. For example, it regulates our body temperature. It also regulates body thirst or appetite. Even it can regulate some of our hormone secretion. So if there is any inflammation at the level of the hypothalamus, inflammation causes damage of the cell and ultimately it can cause death of the cells. And whenever there is a death of cells within the hypothalamus will not be able to function properly. Therefore, that can cause many diseases, including diabetes and obesity.
Okay, and then when these neurons in your hypothalamus are starting to die off, then you get these weird things going on with thirst and body temperature and appetite.
Yes, of course, appetite, even the insulin secretion, that is very important for diabetic people.
Right. So in this paper, you also talked about how you found inflammation in the colon from the high-fat diet as well. And the colon or large intestine sort of absorbs all that water and some of the minerals from the food we eat. It eventually produces a solid mass of waste that we poop out. So if our colon starts to become inflamed from high-fat diets, could that prevent our colon from absorbing all the water and minerals that our body actually needs?
No, the answer is no, because the role of our gut or intestine is to absorb nutrients as well as different minerals from the intestinal lumen to inside our body. And this gut has another role. It also prevents absorption of different toxic materials because whenever we eat something, all are not good for our health. Even our gut microbiome or gut bacteria can also produce some toxic materials. So normally in a healthy gut, they protect our body from getting these kind of toxic materials. But whenever there is inflammation that can cause damage of the gut, that is called leaky gut. Whenever there is a leaky gut, that means gut cannot filter toxic and uh, other valuable nutrients. The leaky gut means it can leak everything, including the nutrients and including the toxic materials. And that toxic materials can goes into our body and then cause many other side effects or disease.
Oh, well, that's not good. So you were talking about how there was a bacteria in your gut. So there's healthy bacteria in your colon that we sometimes call flora. And
Yeah.
they sort of break down some of the leftover materials from our food and cause things like gas, but they also make vitamin K, which is a nutrient our bodies need. Are those bacteria affected when our colon gets inflamed from eating high fat foods?
Yeah, actually, hyper feeding affect the whole microbiome community in our gut. They can affect all the bacteria. And studies shows that the hyper feeding cause the decrease of healthy bacteria and increase of harmful bacteria or bad bacteria. So that can cause many other problems, including the inflammation.
Okay. And then there was a different paper, and we were actually talking about it the other day, how not only does a high fat diet cause inflammation in your gut and your brain and change your microbiome, but that change in the microbiome actually affects way more stuff than just your gut.
Yes,
Could
of
you tell us
course.
a little more about that?
Okay, so if you want to know actually how high-fat diet affect not only inflammation, also the microbiome-mediated inflammation, correct? So for example, the one group of microbiome that is called gram-negative microbiome. So those microbiome can produce a lot of toxic materials known as lipopolysaccharides. So the lipopolysaccharide is a material of their cell membrane. So whenever these bacteria grow in a limited number, and then they can increase the level of the lipopolysaccharides, and that is called endotoxin. And this endotoxin bind with many other receptors with our immunocells, and then release of many cytotoxic cytokines, and that can cause or produce inflammation. So this
Okay.
is the one way, yeah.
So bad bacteria, there's a bunch of weird things that they do in our body, and that causes inflammation.
Yes.
So in one study, you fed rats a normal diet and then rats with a high-fat diet. And in the end, those rats with a high-fat diet messed up with their gut bacteria, and they actually ended up developing insulin resistance or like type 2 diabetes. Why would that be? Because like a lot of people are under, even I'm under the impression that type 2 diabetes is mostly from like eating too sugary foods. So why is a high-fat diet also bad?
Okay, so there are multiple different mechanisms through which gut bacteria can affect our body insulin sensing system. So the study that I did or I participated in, that was like our gut nutrient sensing pathway. For example, if we eat glucose, I mean, if we drink glucose, or if we eat some other nutrient like protein, carbohydrate, or fatty foods, every nutrient has their trigger at the level of our gut. And that trigger, that whenever they send signal to our brain can regulate our whole body glucose homeostasis, I mean, the glucose level in our blood. So what happened, whenever we eat high-fat diet, that can change the microbiome level in our gut, and that bad bacteria can cause, that bad bacteria can cause the desensitization, I mean desensitization of the nutrients. That means whenever we drink glucose, glucose cannot be able to sense our, I mean, glucose cannot be able to send signals to our brain to regulate the glucose homeostasis. So thus the bacteria can disrupt the nutrient sensing pathway at the level of the gut and can cause insulin resistance.
Okay, so not only does messing up with your gut flora cause inflammation in your gut, letting in those toxins, but it also messes with the glucose levels in your blood, like your blood sugar.
Yes, it can.
Interesting. And then back to this paper right here.
Yeah.
You sort of talked about ghrelin, a hormone that tells you that you're hungry, like when your stomach's growling and saying, feed me. You said that when you have ghrelin present in the body before having the high-fat diet, that kind of reduced the inflammation in your hypothalamus. So if I was starving and had lots of natural ghrelin in my body telling me that I'm hungry, would that help reduce the inflammation in our hypothalamus from the fatty foods?
I cannot say no. Could be. It could be. There is a possibility that it could reduce inflammation. I mean, fasting or starving can reduce inflammation at the level of the brain. But so far, in my knowledge, there is no studies done. I mean, check those kind of things, whether the fasting or starving can regulate the inflammation. But interestingly, very recently, one group of people, I'm a researcher at the Toronto uh, University of Toronto, they discovered that fasting can improve inflammatory response. That means fasting increase ghrelin, and fasting also cause, also cause increased ghrelin, and fasting can improve inflammation. I mean, if I combine these two things, those researchers, those group of researchers, they did not check whether ghrelin increase or decrease. They just check fasting and then inflammatory cytokines or inflammatory markers in rodents, but they did not check ghrelin. But it is possible because everyone knows fasting increase ghrelin, and they are finding that fasting improve inflammation. So it is possible maybe fasting will improve inflammation, but we will have to check that. We cannot say right now.
Okay, so then the amount of ghrelin that was present in the mice before you fed them a high-fat diet, that's way more than their body would naturally produce if they were hungry.
Exactly, that was very high dose.
Oh.
So I cannot say from that study whether fasting can improve or not.
And then what sorts of high-fat foods would cause similar inflammation in the gut and in the brain for humans?
I mean, any kind of high-fat food that contains saturated fat or fatty acids that can cause inflammation. This including maybe ice cream, or you can say butter or cheese, any food that contains saturated fat that can cause inflammation.
So then saturated fats are the ones that are solid at room temperature, and
Yeah,
then unsaturated fats are the ones that are liquidy at room temperature, like olive oil.
yes, exactly. That is
So
correct.
then eating an avocado that's super high in fat, that's not a problem because it's high in unsaturated fats.
Exactly.
So then it's more the burger and fries of the world that are sort of contributing to the inflammation in our brain and in our gut.
Yes.
Okay. And then before I let you go, I have one last question for you. What piece of advice could you give to the young scientists that are watching today?
Well, so be honest and work hard and never be demoralized, and don't look at others. If you look at others, oh, they are doing very great, but I'm not getting data, or I'm not doing anything. No, don't feel bad whenever other person doing good or something. Just work hard and be honest. So you will be successful for sure.
Yeah, because what people don't see is that when you have a really successful experiment, it sometimes took like 20, 50, 100 failed experiments to get to that point.
That's true. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Zaved, for joining us for our weekly Meet a Scientist interview.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. And the next week, we're going to have Sonu, a master's student from Dr. Jassel's lab from the Institute of Cardiovascular Sciences. And they're going to share a little bit about how exercise can help keep our hearts healthy and actually protected from harmful and damaging things like chemotherapy. So make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for updates. Check out our new website at youthbiolab.ca and follow Youth Biolab on Instagram and Twitter. And thanks everyone for watching. Talk to you next week.
Bye.